and welcome to our event tonight. My name is Eni Bernard with Penguin Random House. To begin, I'd like to thank tonight's sponsors: Haley Booksellers, Beebe Memorial Library, Lyrica Public Library, Cary Memorial Library, Flint Memorial Library, Melrose Public Library, Milton Public Library, Nevins Library, Robbins Library, and the Wilmington Memorial Library. I have just a few housekeeping items to touch on before I turn things over to tonight's fantastic speakers. If you'd like to submit questions for our speakers, you can do so by utilizing the Q&A module, which should be available at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote questions submitted by others. You can activate the Zoom chat, which should also be at the bottom of your screen, and comment along with the conversation. We would suggest toggling your chat from all panelists, which is the default, to all panelists and attendees. This will make your comments available to the whole group and perhaps spark some friendly conversation. Now I'm going to ask our speakers to start their microphones and cameras and come out onto the digital stage. While our speakers are getting settled, I'll mention that Courtney Sullivan is the best-selling author of Maine and Saints for All Occasions, and tonight she's going to be discussing her latest novel, the instant New York Times bestseller, Friends and Strangers. Courtney will be speaking with Robin Young, who brings more than 25 years of broadcast experience to her role as co-host of Here and Now with WBUR and NPR, with almost 6 million listeners across the country. So with all of that, I'll now turn things over to Courtney and Robin.
Thank you. Courtney.
Robin, I'm so excited to see your face.
No me to see yours, and my favorite pearls. I just had to say one thing to the assembled. Courtney, there are people here who know us, probably, and I have to fix my bio because my online bio says I have more than 25 years of broadcast experience, and some of them are doing the math and thinking, well, actually, much more, because I knew you when your mother, the marvelous Joyce Gallagher, was carrying you, and when we both worked at WBZ.
Yeah.
She's downstairs babysitting now?
Yes, it's come full circle because now she's downstairs with my 20-month-old and my 3-year-old.
Yeah, so it just is just a pleasure to see you blossom, and babysitting is key to what this is about. I know a lot of people have read the book, but I'm attempting a little synopsis here, okay, for those who haven't. So in Friends and Strangers, we meet Elizabeth, a writer with some success, who's made what she fears is a terrible chessboard move from the very hip Brooklyn, where moms meet on message boards, to the suburbs of a New England college town where her husband Andrew has a shot at pursuing his dream of inventing a solar grill. And the moms meet in book clubs that devolve into gossipy pub crawls. Elizabeth rejects them, but up all night and alone all day with her newborn, depends more and more on Sam, the college senior from a big Irish Catholic family who works in the school cafeteria while trying to break into the art gallery world, or maybe marry that much older guy she met in London, we're not sure. As these stories are revealed, we see what you see when you go to college or when you babysit, that people live different lives. You know, some kids work in college kitchens, some can afford to take a semester abroad and more. And Sam and Elizabeth, who reach across they're from the opposite sides of the tracks, they reach across those tracks until what seems like a terrible betrayal. The title of the book's Friends and Strangers, we realize is true. Elizabeth and Sam, mom and babysitter, may know each other so deeply, may be friends, but actually they're strangers. They don't know each other at all. And we who babysat, and maybe those who hired babysitters, get a stunning reminder at the book's closing that as a babysitter, you may think, and I did, you are the closest person to a family, the most important person in a child's life, and maybe to that child's mother. But that relation can be ephemeral, and the babysitter, the child, and the mother move on. I'm getting all verklempt here. Do I have it about right?
That is the best synopsis ever, Robin. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
good night.
Bye. That's fabulous. And I think you're so right. I love that you too were a babysitter, because I think those of us who were babysitters, we understand something about the very specific rite of passage that is.
Yeah. Well, the New York Times, in their lovely review, said it was an honest rendering of what happens behind closed doors. So let's take a look. You say that birthing the story was actually a belly and book relay race, because You had a child 9 months in the belly, and you had just given over the first draft of the book. You had another toddler at home. You're delivering a lot here, a book and a baby. And you just said you were a babysitter. So how much was this informed by your babysitting? How much by your pregnancy and motherhood?
So several years ago, I want to say maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I was at Smith College, my alma mater, to give a reading from one of my books. And I think it was from Maine, my second novel. And after the event, I came out of this hall where I'd been speaking, and I walked to the crosswalk. I was going to my car, and of course I'm having, you know, that one of those moments where like the past and the present overlap, because I spent my college years here, and now it's been 10 years since I graduated. And I'm standing in the crosswalk. It starts to rain, of course, because it's a very cinematic moment. And this big SUV pulls up to the crosswalk, and behind the wheel of the SUV is this woman, this mother, whose baby girl I used to babysit for my senior year of college. And she very much put me on the path that I ended up on. She really encouraged me to go to New York. You know, she really encouraged me to be a writer, which is what I wanted most of all in the world, but I wasn't really sure, how do you do that? And she had been in New York. She's an artist. And so she was able to say, oh, it's doable, you know, and introduced me to so many of her friends, and was just such a lovely, lovely presence in my life. But as you said, you know, 10 years had passed, right? So that year, my senior year that I spent babysitting for her daughter, we were very close. I felt we were very close. We grew apart, you know, like life goes on and you go in different directions. And so here it's 10 years later, I see her, I immediately know who she is. And I'm like, hi, oh my gosh, it's me. She had no idea who I was. She had 2 more children. It's 10 years later. I'm sure she's had many more babysitters, and she just kept driving. And so that night I was having dinner back in Brooklyn with a friend who is also a novelist, Jamie Attenberg. And I was telling her this whole story, and I was like, we were so close. And then, you know, she didn't even know who I was. And Jamie said, oh, that sounds like it would be a great jumping off point for a novel. Mm. And when you're a fiction writer, you know, there are moments and ideas and things that have this kind of shimmer around them, where you know, I'm going to write about that. But it might not be the time, you know? And so you kind of put it in your pocket and you say, that's something, but I'm not sure why yet or what yet. And so, you know, many years went by, and then I was pregnant with my first child, and this story was just really calling to me, because I felt like, now I've been the babysitter, soon I'm going to be the mother. I'm going to know what it's like from both of these women's point of view. And I'd love to write this kind of conversation between them, which in many ways is kind of a conversation with my younger self.
Oh, fascinating. So Elizabeth, who's the mom, who's talking to Sam, it's you talking to young you.
Yeah, and also, you know, one of the most wonderful things that happens when you have a novel come out is that the novel kind of leads to unexpected things in your real life. And so in this case, I had a piece in the New York Times this weekend about babysitting, and I mentioned this woman in the piece, and she ended up emailing me. And so now we're back in touch, which is so wonderful.
Oh, I have to tell you, that's
isn't that nice?
Yeah, you know, you sent me, I've been Googling these poor children that I used to babysit for, who are like 50 now.
Oh, wow.
But I've been, you made me do that. We'll talk more about that.
Are you going to reach out to them, do you think?
Well, one of them, we had been in touch.
Oh,
and
nice.
Yeah, and the others, you know, disappeared. And when I say we have been in touch, you know, the last time was like 20 years ago. So I want to, you know, and there's a story behind there that maybe we have time for later. But, you know, this notion that the child who was 3 million years ago is going to have no memory of me, even though you know, how can that be? So it's, you bring us to that. But talking more about why you even, you know, these topics. Elizabeth, your character like you is a writer. Sam, the babysitter like you, from a, you know, big Irish Catholic Boston family with a lot of love. The New York Times in their review also point out that reading and babysitting share a distinct pleasure. which is they're both pulling back a curtain to see how the other people live. And I thought to myself, oh, little do they know. I mean, nobody's listening, right? You could go like see if they had like dirty magazines. And I'm talking about like back then that was Playboy. I mean, we're not, you could eat all their ice cream.
Oh, yeah.
To be in someone else's home when it's asleep, the house is literally asleep. It feels like the curtains are asleep. Late at night is a very intimate thing.
It's the best. My best friend from high school, Lauren, she grew up in Winthrop, Massachusetts. We were always babysitting at the same time, and we would be on the phone with each other while we were babysitting. But she was like, she didn't really like babysitting, but she did it because we wanted the money, we needed the money. So Lauren always would involve these children in just these games that were all about brushing her hair. She has beautiful long blonde hair. And all they would do, these poor kids, is just sit there all night brushing Lauren's hair. But I was like into the arts and crafts and into baking and all of these things. But when those kids went to bed, absolutely, I remember knowing exactly how much ice cream you could take out of the container without getting noticed.
Right.
So, you take like 2 cookies out of the box and some ice cream and just a little bit here and there.
Yeah, take the cookies from the back of the box.
Exactly.
If slide out.
Exactly.
And see something like your own parents are such a puzzle. And here's a couple. And as young women in particular, back in my day, they were just women. You're watching them too. You're watching them and their family and how are they functioning, especially if it's different from your family.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
That's the case here.
And I think those women, especially the mothers, they are these models of possible adulthood, possible womanhood, and so it's really fascinating to see them up close, right? It's all about completely have a breakdown. But it's true that people say like no one knows what happens behind closed doors, but your babysitter does know, because at a certain point you forget that the babysitter is there. And it's funny because to me, I started off writing fiction about my family and very much being an only child by not just my parents, but even my cousins, all at least a decade younger than I am. So I was the only child around in a big sea of adults for a long time. And that is another dynamic where people tend to forget you're listening. And that is where I, sort of cut my teeth on being a nosy eavesdropper, which is essential for fiction writing.
And babysitting.
Yeah,
because sure. I mean, you can tell, are they fighting or, so many things.
Oh, yeah.
So it's about that. It's also about women in groups. And I want to ask you about this because I mentioned that Elizabeth moves to this suburbs and there's this book club, her neighborhood she joins. And remember, she's the author. It could have been lifted out of a tea party in the 1800s, women behind their fans, gossiping about somebody else in the group. They're supposed to be reading Mary McCarthy's The Group. They're not getting it at all. Talk about this semi-autobiographical novel from Mary McCarthy. She went to Vassar in 1933, classic story of women. You went to Smith. What role is that book playing here?
Well, it's kind of, in some ways, I guess it was like a joke with myself because my first novel, Commencement, which came out 11 years ago now, it takes place at Smith. It's, I saw it when I first started writing it. I endeavored to write a modern updating of the group. And then I kind of realized that wasn't really what I was doing, but I love the group. I love that novel. And I, myself, as a writer, I'm really fascinated. No matter what the book or whatever the story is, I always come back to this kind of central obsession, which is that the moment a woman is born determines so much of who she is allowed to become. And I think the group is just a magnificent drawing of that idea, right? The novel. And in this, my book, and Friends and Strangers, when these women are talking about the group at book club, there's one woman, who Elizabeth really wants to be friends with because she said, she actually gets it and cares and wants to talk about it. This was a little bit inspired by my mom but my mom's book club invited me to come in person for, I think, my last book, Saints for All Occasions. And so I took the train from New York to Boston, and I go to the book club meeting, and I occasionally go to book club meetings, and usually it's like I get a little bit of like, you know, fanfare. They're excited. They have great questions. My mom's book club, it was like, Courtney, good job writing this novel. So anyway, did you hear what was going on down the street with blah, blah, blah? And that was just kind of funny to me, you know. But that scene has really gotten me in trouble because, and my agent too, because so many people think it's based on their book club. Isn't that interesting?
That's telling. Yes. Because why would you think that? And it's like Mary McCarthy's The Group. Many of the women went to Vassar with her, were furious at her because they thought these certain characters were based on them.
Oh, yeah.
And you'd have to say, but well, why? Were you that mean, or were you that? Well, but I do wonder about, you know, what are you saying? Because, you know, there are people I know who have, you know, lovely book clubs where they wouldn't think of gossiping about somebody's husband and really would get deep into Mary McCarthy's The Group. This doesn't happen in this group. There also are friends of Sam's at college. Sam, I mentioned, she works in the cafeteria. She's very close with the women of color, many immigrants who work there, feels more of an identification with them. Her clueless college friends who she loves have not a clue who makes their food or picks up after them.
Yeah.
The fairer sex doesn't always come out that fair.
That's true. Well, you know, my husband's grandmother is 94 years old, and she's one of the wisest people I know. And she said something to me once that really stuck with me. She said that, you know, when you are looking to like buy a house, you look at the house and you think, you know, oh, do I like the color? Do I like the size of the master bedroom? She said, but really it comes down to your neighbors, and you never know until you get into the house what the neighbors are going to be like. And that has kind of like terrified me as a lifelong renter, which I still am. That has terrified me because it's really true. And it's like many other things in life that, you know, you sort of take a leap of faith and then you have to figure it out once you land. And so Elizabeth, she's living in a college town, and she envisions that everyone will be the kind of people who sit around and have super deep conversations about the group, you know, and actually there are people like that in the town. She even says, you know, if I had lived 2 blocks away, then this other woman, Gwen, would be my neighbor. And on the other side of her, I'd have this professor. But I, for some reason, ended up on this street with these women who've known each other since high school and just want to gossip with each other. So I think that, you know, part of it is just that sort of randomness. And then definitely a lot of people in this book are kind of not in touch with their own privilege, to use a word that's getting a lot of use lately. But
I was going to say, your timing is perfect, because in fact, most of us are recognizing, you know, even if you are a card-carrying member of whatever it is, the people who know their white privilege club.
Yeah.
You aren't, and you can't call yourself an ally until someone else says you're an ally and they feel you're an ally. I mean, all of these things are under a lot of review right now, and inequity. Yeah. Sam becomes a friend of Elizabeth. Her husband's parents live in this town. One of the reasons they come here, and they're just, his business is failing. He's a driver and he's being wiped out by Uber. All his life, he just wanted to put on a nice suit and take people to the airport and open the door. And now Uber's wiped that out. And he becomes a kind of an inequity activist. And Sam very much identifies with him. Elizabeth doesn't even see the story and the future book right under her nose. And I saw in the afterward that you credited your mom, Joyce Gallagher, with this thing that George, the father-in-law, talks about, which is the hollow tree. The hollow tree. Mm-hmm. Talk about that.
Well, my mom, again, I think that when you're a writer, when you write books, everyone in your life is always like, you should write this. I have a great idea for you. You should, and usually you just are trained to think like, trained by yourself, especially if the person's related to you, to think like, no, thank you. But my mom was like, I have this thing. She was in my head, I think of it as the hollow tree, and you should write a book about it. And
Oh, wow.
and she described it. This was several years ago. You know, she said, it's like, it feels like on the surface, you can say America is doing okay, things seem all right, but there's a lot that has gone away and that hasn't been addressed. And there's no there in a lot of respects. And I think what has happened, it's really weird that the book it comes out now, because I think what we've seen with COVID, since COVID began, is how many people were really just hanging on by a thread. When you can have tens of millions of jobs gone in the span of a week, and now we're seeing stories that millions of people, of course, have also lost their health insurance during a pandemic, you know, you begin to see how tenuous a lot of it has been for a long time. And I think that the gig economy is a huge piece of that. You know, for a long time, it's been this story of, you know, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And if you fail, it is your fault that you did. And that's kind of George's obsession, that, you know, no, it's actually these systems of extreme wealth and power that kind of keep people in their place, in a sense.
Well, and it's a reminder too, again, a lot of us are having flashbacks to our babysitting days. I'm reading somebody's comment. I remember babysitting and being shocked that the mother had Wifey by Judy Blume on her shelf. You know, I've been thinking a lot, and maybe I just wasn't aware of great wealth. Obviously, I lived with families for summers at a time. Or, you know, when I was broke traveling back from the prerequisite cross-country trip. So we broke down, the car literally broke down in Colorado, and that's where I took a job as a governess and family there. But now I realize they were super wealthy, but the inequity and the gap now is astonishing.
Oh, yes.
And babysitters, you know, many babysitters may come from the same economic stratus they're, you know, the families they're babysitting for, but many don't. And it's just another way that young people are confronted with a world that they may not have known about.
Yes. And I think, you know, we talk so much about sort of like millennials or this entitled generation or this lazy generation. But then you look at what has actually happened in this culture, in this country, and how hard and how expensive it is to go to college now. The fact that when you sign up, you know, if you're a middle class person or anything, you know, below middle class, you know that you are signing on for so much debt, even before you really understand maybe what that totally means. You know that you're, you know, one thing when I was writing this book, I spoke to a lot of women who had graduated from Smith when Sam does, which is 2015. Sam, the babysitter in the book.
Right.
But it was on a message board that we were having the conversation. It was all Smith alums. And so, you know, I said, I'm really trying to think about the idea of, again, tying back to your moment in time, right? So we want to say that if you graduate from a great college and you work hard, you will get a fabulous job. But actually, what ended up kind of coming out in this conversation was women who had graduated in the early 80s, the early 90s, 2008, you know, all different years, saying, well, because I graduated in this particular economy, I couldn't get a job for 3 years or 5 years. And that has held me back all along the way. So, you know, you think about it like this American kind of individualism that we cherish is in some ways very much a myth. And in some ways, maybe not, but.
Well, and again, for those who haven't read it, I don't want to give too much away, but those who have do give leg ups to other people, and that does happen here, although, you know, the recipient may not know it at the time.
Yes.
And that's how that world works.
Yes.
Couple things. You said you spoke to Smithies, people who went to Smith. And in fact, you thank, let's see, a member of the Bococa Moms and Smithy Parents Facebook pages, Facebook groups. Bococa Moms, is that Brooklyn?
Yes, yes.
And Smith Families, that's Smith. In the book, these message boards are, again, they're like the book clubs. They can get pretty mean-spirited. Elizabeth at night, when she just has had it with the suburbs, she gets on her Brooklyn Moms, I can't remember the name of it, message board, and she just reads everything. And they veer off again into these mean-spirited things. But then you credit them. You say what happens in a closed Facebook group stays in a closed Facebook group, book group. But do you think they are good for us?
I think they are good and bad. I think, one thing that's fascinating about right now, and I really learned this when I became a mother, is that women are congregating in these online spaces and telling each other everything. Men do not do this. They just talk about sports with the people they've been best friends with for 30 years. Women get in a Facebook moms group and ask a question about, like, what is the most absorbent overnight diaper? And then 2 days later, they're telling every secret about their marriage. So I find that fascinating. And the idea that there's something about those groups that it can be because you all have children, you all live in the same neighborhood, you all voted for Hillary, you all, whatever it is, like, women get in these groups, but if they start off talking about the topic at hand, but it always really gets down to the root of how they live and their real concerns and secrets and worries. And that to me is just so fascinating, because there is something about being at a computer screen or looking at your phone and feeling like it's very anonymous, but those groups are not anonymous at all. In fact, you can click right on someone and say, oh, okay, she lives here, she went to this school, I know her husband, whatever it is. But there's something about those groups. So to one extent, you can laugh at what happens in these groups. And I often do. And, there's like a whole side piece of it, which is your real friends who are also in the groups, screenshotting the craziest post of the day and sending it to your friend and talking about it and laughing about it with her. But the flip side is that I was like astonished by when I had my son, my first child, is how generous women are. And the idea that Elizabeth says this in the book, and I think it all the time, that, someone, when you have a new baby, someone with a child 6 weeks older than yours is a prophet. That is the person who knows everything. And it's like, you're learning a new language, and then it changes again and again and again. So, what will you do with all that accrued knowledge? Well, in this case, you'll share it, so these women come on, and everyone, there's a cycle. People are having new babies all the time, and people are having new 2-year-olds all the time. And so people are asking questions that are very often questions that have already been asked, right? But the same women are going to go on and say, this is the best pediatrician, or this is the best place to get that Ninja Turtle birthday cake, or whatever it is, or a much deeper question about, am I an okay mother? Am I doing this right? I need support. And there's just an amazing community, I think, that comes about.
Well, especially because maybe grandma isn't living in the house with you, which she might have once been, or even in the same town.
Right.
Yeah. You also, there's a sentence, I just was curious about it. You've said you babysat and you were a mom, but you also write, I met Radha Khan, without whom there would be no book in your hands. Who is that?
So Radha is my children's nanny. And and that experience of a very different experience than, being a college age babysitter, because she is a professional career nanny. And she's older than I am, but we also, it's another one of these relationships where you're together every day. I work from home, and so Radha and I have spent so much time talking about our lives, and also Radha's daughter, who's in college, and I have spent so much time talking about our lives, and come to really love their family, and also have our families kind of interact quite a bit, her 2 children, my 2 children, our husbands, and us, but also being aware of the fact that not wanting to be Elizabeth, not wanting to be the person who doesn't give the other person the chance. Elizabeth is kind of like, well, we're best friends, so of course this girl wants to come over for dinner on Saturday nights. And of course she wants to do this, that, and the other, which actually Sam kind of does want to, but, just being very aware of like what the relationship is. And I think about myself, you as a governess, me as a young babysitter, but much more so for Rada, that, what is it like to go into a home very different from your own home and work there? When you are the person in that position, you are always, if you are someone working in someone else's home, it's like you have to speak two languages. You have to speak the language of your own life and the language of that life. And I felt that way, taking care of nannying and babysitting for children in families, like you said, who were just wildly wealthy, and having to kind of, act as if, okay, yeah, this is all normal. I remember I was a nanny for a year in London, and they always wanted to bring me with them on vacation. And I remember just thinking that was so weird because, like both my parents had full-time jobs. So I had nannies, I was in daycare, but it was like, because my mom is working, it wasn't like, we want to bring you to the beach with us so we don't, so to me as a nanny, that was very weird, but like, that's just a different kind of class dynamic, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's funny. In a few minutes, we're going to take questions, by the way, and I see they are coming in, so continue with the Q&A questions, and there's some on the chat too, but, again, you've made me think, and a lot of other people, from what I can see, you've made us think about our years of babysitting, and they can be profound experiences. I lived on Long Island, and I was a babysitter for this family, and they said, we would love you to come live with us in the Hamptons for the summer. And this is the summer of my senior year. And I'm going to this gets kind of serious here, but it's by way of getting back to your ending there. Just adored these little kids, 5-year-old Annie, and then 10-year-old David, and parents lovely. For me, it was, lovely, lovely parents. And they confided in me right at the beginning that David, the 10-year-old, had been diagnosed with a fatal cancer.
Oh my God.
I know. And so we were going to give him the best summer, and also we were going to give Annie, because they were going to be very involved with David. So I was going to be giving Annie, and Annie and I became like, we were pledged to get married, that kind of thing. And I was so conscious of this. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Yes. There's going to be a loss, and we never know when loss is going to come, but we did in this case. And at the very last night, I was going away to college in 2 weeks, and the very last night, I took the family car, and I was 17, so I had just started driving seriously, and it was at night, and Andy and I had a big date to go to the movies and come back, and there is a curve in the Hamptons. It's actually called Dead Man's Curve, and we were forced off the road by a drunk driver.
Oh my God.
And she was almost killed, and I was almost killed.
Oh my God.
I know. And all I could think of was, this is their remaining child.
Oh
I mean, God. The responsibility we give young people for our children. Now, fast forward, the broken nose is, broken everything, and she, they didn't have locked seats back then, and she was so little. She's sitting in the front seat because that's what we did, and her seat slid forward, and her feet hit the dashboard, and she broke her ankles, her knees, her hips.
Oh my God!
Horrible, horrible, horrible. And then I went to college. Packed up in ice, and those, like one of those dogs with the big thing,
oh my God,
things on your head, and just wept for a year, and then David died, and I was away at college, and the parents broke up, and it's like, wait, how did this happen?
Yeah.
The most important relationship in the world, and they were wonderful, by the way. They forgave me more than any. It wasn't my fault,
No.
But maybe a more mature driver could have recovered, but I couldn't. But they never blamed me. They were so loving, but then it's over. Yeah. It's over. And like 22 years later, which is about 20 years ago now, I got a call. It's Annie.
Oh, I love that.
And I'm gonna find her again.
I love that.
But you remind us of that these are such powerful relationships.
Yeah.
And then, like you say, the woman in the crosswalk.
Well, and but it's funny because I mean, I have some kids like the Vays might even be watching because they always come to my events at the Milton Public Library. And they that's the family I worked for the most in high school, and I loved all three of their kids, and I still know them so well, and it's so lovely. But I had some really intense situations like you described too. I cared for these two little girls when I was in college. And their mom asked me at one point, she said, because they knew me really well, I knew the family well. She said, my sister could really use your help. So I want to sort of give you to my sister and have you become their babysitter instead of ours, because she needs you a lot. So I said, oh, okay. And this poor woman, her husband had been a doctor. She had two little boys, and she was like 8 months pregnant with a third little boy, and her husband died of cancer. And so these kids, I mean, like, I was coming into their home, and this had just happened, and the little baby had just been born when I first came along. And there was such an air of just, sorrow. I mean, it was such a heartbreaking place to be, but then also, like, young children always add joy. So there was also joy, and there was a brand new baby, which is a whole other emotional journey. And it just, I mean, I was such a part of their lives. And in that case, it was such a short time, I couldn't tell you their names now. I couldn't pick them out of a lineup, and I'm sure they couldn't me either, but we just experienced this intensity together. Yeah. And, that happens with babysitting. I think that happens with friendships too. Like, personally, the older I get, the more I'm just so grateful for my female friends. I have no male friends, but I'm grateful for my female friends. And I'm really lucky to still be super close to my best friends from childhood, my best friend from high school, my best friends from college. But I think you also do have these friendships over time that only last for a few months or a year. And for whatever reason, that friendship might actually change you in a very profound way, but not last. And I think that's what's going on in this book to a large degree.
That changed me big time. You can imagine, as you can imagine.
Of course.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We do have some funny questions for you. And so let's take a few of them. And I'm sorry I don't have the names, but someone wants to know, what is your connection to Massachusetts other than being the daughter of the fabulous Joyce Gallagher and WBZ?
Oh, well, I grew up in Milton, Massachusetts, which is actually where I am right now. I'm upstairs in my mom's house while she's downstairs giving my children cupcakes, I think. My son was angling for them. And yeah, I lived in Milton until I went to college at Smith in Western Massachusetts. I've lived in New York now, Manhattan and Brooklyn for 18 years. But, and no one knows this yet, we have moved back to Milton.
Huh?
Today. We moved today.
Like you had nothing else to do. Are you quarantining?
Well, we have been for 4 months in, like, it's weird because my books often have this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where I'll write something and then it happens. So in the book, they leave Brooklyn and they end up in upstate New York, but Elizabeth goes out of her way to say it's really unfashionable upstate. It's not cool upstate, Mm-hmm. And we ended up in really unfashionable upstate for the last 4 months. We've been in like suburban Albany. And we've been totally unto ourselves, but now we will be totally unto ourselves in Milton too.
Well, we're glad. Welcome back. Another asks, did your professors at Smith influence you becoming an author?
Oh my goodness, of course. So of course I was an English major. That comes as a shock to no one, I'm sure. And Smith does not have a lot of emphasis on creative writing. It's much more on studying literature, which at the time I wanted to do more creative writing, but I'm so glad that I got to read, all the great Victorian novels in that setting. Because as much as I wish that I could read Bleak House on the F train on the way to work or whatever, it just never happened. So I'm very thankful for that. And I also studied with some amazing writers. I studied with Kurt Vonnegut. He came and taught a master class at Smith, which was fantastic.
What?
And Sigrid Nunez, who was wonderful. Doug Bauer, who's Massachusetts based. He is a phenomenal teacher. He was a writing teacher too. So I think you could take this writing workshop twice to get for credit. And I think I took it like 4 times. I just kept taking it. But part of it was, you know, as Sam is in the book, she wants to be an artist, but she doesn't know artists. That's not the world that she comes from. So for me, you know, I wanted to be a writer. I didn't personally know tons of writers, but I was able at Smith, you know, whenever a writer came to campus, I just would kind of ask them like, well, what did you do? How did you become what you are? Because it's sort of a mysterious thing, you know, there's not a clear path. So I guess I was sort of looking for guidance in that respect.
You know, I was, well, first I'll ask you, Emiko, our producer at Here and Now, wants to know, we talked about the group, but have you seen or read Wendy Wasserstein's Uncommon Women and Others, which was set at Mount Holyoke?
Yes, a long time ago. But didn't Wendy Wasserstein, did she go to Mount Holyoke? I always think she went to Smith, but I don't think that's not true. I think I'm just claiming her falsely.
I will Google. Here's a question from Amanda. The last time
I have one more thing to say to Emiko. There's a novel called The Cauliflower Heart. It's very hard to find, but it's another women's college novel. It's set at Smith. And if you like Wendy Wasserstein and you like the group, that is one to track down. It's really very special.
Oh, great. We'll write that down. By the way, Mary McCarthy called herself a lady writer. She said, I am a lady writer. And feminists, you know, didn't take that as a negative. They embraced her work. Do you call yourself a lady writer?
Well, I don't know if I'd call myself a lady writer, but what I will say is that I think a huge benefit to me of attending Smith, and, you know, I think people who go to women's colleges tend to be pretty self-selecting anyway, so maybe I was already in that mindset. But I've always been just very interested, unapologetically so, in the lives of women and the history of women. And I become increasingly so the older I get and the more I understand what women do. Now motherhood being the newest chapter of that. But I never had it in my head that the great novels were novels by men. I never had that in my head. And as I have gone through now a decade of publishing novels, I've realized that that's actually rare, that a lot of my female friends who've gone, especially if they've gone through kind of prestigious MFA programs, I might get in trouble for saying this, but they have to kind of unlearn what they've been taught. And I remember when my first novel was out, you know, it's so much about the lives of women, as really all my books are. And I was on tour with this other young woman writer. She was kind of like a real hot shot, and she's very talented. She's wonderful. And someone asked her in this book, at this book event that we were doing together, someone asked her, you know, why did you write a novel from the point of view of a man? And she said, because it's the only way to really be taken seriously. And I thought, you know, that's really tragic, because here we have this incredibly talented woman and she doesn't want to write about women because she doesn't think it's valuable. That's a huge loss.
Yeah, it so is. By the way, I'm just going to throw out the name of another female writer that we just had on the program that you probably know, Gail Caldwell's new book, Bright Precious Thing. It's like,
yes, okay. Amazing.
And here's another question about other writing. I have not yet had the opportunity to read your book, but your discussion of society's haves and have-nots remind me of the theme I found so intriguing in the recent award-winning film Parasite. Do you see any parallels?
Oh my God.
Bingo. Okay. Yes. You see Parasite?
Yes. Parasite. I loved Parasite so much. Did you see it, Robin?
Yes. Let's
it blew me away. My husband and I never, ever, ever go out and do things for fun because we have had a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old for the last 2 years, or at least for the last 1 year. But one day we were like, let's go to a movie. It was right when I had finished my book. So we were like, let's go celebrate by seeing a movie. And then afterward, we'll go out for dinner. And we went and saw Parasite. And then my poor husband, I was so blown away by that movie that I didn't even want to talk at dinner. I just wanted to like sit alone in the darkness and think about that amazing movie. Yes, that idea, Parasite is like such a, I can't say it's a parallel to my book because I think it's like one of the most brilliant creations of all time. But that is what was so stunning to me about that, the haves and the have-nots. These wealthy people who have this gorgeous home, and here these people come every day and serve them in their home in a variety of different ways. And they have it's such a one-way relationship, right? Because these employers, they have no idea what their staff, what their home is like, or even who they are, of course. When I was writing this book, it was a real sort of life-altering couple of years because, as I said, I had my 2 children during this couple of years. But also, when my son Leo just turned 1, it was right around the time of his first birthday. It was really when the separation of families at the border by the Trump administration was so much in the news. It was really, people were starting to know what was happening. And I think there are so many terrible things happening all the time in our society that we kind of glaze over at a certain point. You can't take it all in or it would just destroy you. But that story, I couldn't live with it. Like, I was already pregnant with my daughter too, so I just had that energy around me. And when my son would cry, I would think about it. I'd think about these mothers and like that. My son
how
only
do they do that? Like, how are they doing
I can't.
that?
So
Yeah.
I was like, I have to do something. Like, this has to be like a big part of my life. I have to do something. And so I ended up part of this incredible group of women. Our group is called Immigrant Families Together. We're all volunteers. We're all mothers. And we have bonded out now over 115 moms. We raise their bond. We get them reunited with their children all over the country. And we kind of create these pods of support wherever they are. We pay for their housing, their legal fees, their medical, whatever it is they need. And we just kind of help their families through the whole process of seeking asylum. But doing that work, I mean, of course, it's like we understand, like you said about it going in the sort of the other direction. Yes, we understand there are very, very wealthy people in the world, right? But once you go into their homes, that's when you kind of have your light bulb moment. And in interacting with these moms day in and day out over 2 years, it really struck me in a way it never had before, that privilege is not just about having a ton of money. It's about your safety net, if that makes sense. So like Sam in the book, she's a college student, she's middle class, she sort of has a chip on her shoulder about the student loan debt she's going to graduate with, and she's right to feel that way. But Sam has a safety net. We can pretty much guarantee she's never going to spend a night on the streets, right? Because she can always go to her family. She can always go to her friends. Her education is a form of privilege, and certainly her citizenship is a form of privilege, right? So these women who I met in this process of being part of Immigrant Families Together, when they cross the border, we might view them as, the poorest people in the country, which they are, but they actually, not only do they not have a safety net, they are the safety net for the family back home in Guatemala or El Salvador. They are expected immediately to be sending money home. So this notion of, all of us existing on a spectrum of privilege, I think we too often tend to look to the extreme end and say, oh, that person has so much more than me, but really there's just such a vast array of lives.
Well, we have to talk about that wonderful group for a possible story. We have to do that.
Oh, I would
yes,
love
yes.
that. I would love
getting
that.
Getting some comments. Amanda writes, I prefer female writers. I can tell instantly when reading it's a male. If it's a male writer, I just know that sounds odd, but it's true.
I love that. I agree.
Yep. Kate writes, when Elizabeth helps Sam, somehow Elizabeth does something that gets Sam to go to New York. It just changes her life. And it reminds Katie, it makes many of us think of how where we are because that one moment or somebody helped us along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have this?
Do I?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, actually, no, you know what she says, and have we repaid this by helping someone else, which looks like you're doing with the immigrant group.
Again, it's weird. So having gone to Smith, when I was living in London, I took a year off from Smith before my senior year. So that's when I lived in London. And I worked first at a literary agency for a few months, and then I became a nanny. And the way that I got a job at a literary agency was just that there was a woman who had gone to Smith who worked at Random House in London, and she just was sort of like, you go to Smith, let me get you a job. And I mean, it was amazing. And I was also, then when I became a nanny, I worked for a family who had three boys under the age of 2. They had 18-month-old twins and a newborn, which was insane. And one day I was pushing them in the stroller, and this woman's like flagging me down in traffic. She stopped in the middle of traffic in London, and people are beeping their horns. I thought there's something wrong with her. I navigate the giant stroller over to her, and she's like, Smith College? As I was wearing a Smith College sweatshirt. I said, yes. And she gave me her card. She was driving a Mercedes. She had like a gorgeous Hermes scarf. And she just was like, anything you need. I went to Smith College. So that notion of women helping younger women, I'm all over it. And I love, when young women, which they often do, reach out to me curious about becoming writers or getting into publishing. I've had many, many, many conversations and dinners and lunches with women like that. And some of them have become like very close friends too, because when you're graduating from college, someone 6 years older seems totally ancient to you. But a few years later, like you're both basically adults and you can sort of be friends for real. So absolutely. But when I was an intern, a summer intern at the Atlantic Monthly magazine when it was in Boston. And it was this magnificent editor, Lucy Prince, who had hired me to be an intern. And she was the person who, when I was 18, gave my stories to an agent. She said, I want to pass some of these short stories you wrote on to this young agent who also had been an intern at the Atlantic and was just starting out. And her name is Brittany Bloom. She's still my agent. It's been 20 years. Before COVID happened, we went away on a, romantic 20th anniversary trip to upstate New York. We had the most wonderful time. But it was only because of this connection that Lucy made between Brittany and myself that really my writing career happened.
Well, we just have a couple minutes. One question, someone asks, how has your writing style changed? Because you have children around. I think we could just hear them.
Oh no.
So I mean, a lot of people are at home. They're trying to work at home. Their kids are there. You've done 5 books in 10 years, and people are congratulating you on that. But how does it change now? You can't go to a writing space, I would imagine. So how do you can you write with little ones all over you?
No. Not at all. I, one time before I had kids, I went and I saw Jane Smiley give a talk, and I love Jane Smiley. 1,000 Acres is probably my favorite novel ever. And she was like, oh yeah, I don't understand what people are talking about. She said, I can just sit at my kitchen table, type a novel that, then we'll win the Pulitzer Prize. And like the kids are all around me and they need things and I'm feeding them and I'm doing this and that. And I was just like, oh, okay, I guess that's doable. But for me, it is actually not doable. I don't know if that was true or not, but I do find that with my first novel and a half, I had a full-time job. I was at the New York Times as a researcher, and I wanted to write a novel, so I was doing it late at night. That's the time that I had to do it. And I think most writers do start off with a day job, and they either write early in the morning before everyone else is awake or late at night after everyone else is asleep. And you kind of tend to be one or the other type of a writer.
Yeah.
So I was always a middle of the night writer, and I'm back to it now. I'm getting my writing done between like 11 p.m. and 2 a.m.
Okay, J. Courtney Sullivan, the lightning round. What is the J?
Julie.
Okay, and your reaction, they would like to see the face when you heard that Jenna Bush Hager picked your book for the Today Show Book Club.
I was so happy. I was so happy.
Wow.
Because, you know, she really sells books, which is lovely, but also I really love her choices. Have you read the new Lily King, Writers and Lovers? Oh my gosh. You have to start reading it immediately after the Zoom. And also the Kevin Wilson book. What is it called? Kevin Wilson.
Hold on. If we had an audience, they could shout it out.
Nothing to See Here. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, you know,
Thank you,
and J. Courtney Sullivan, Friends and Strangers. But you have given us such a reading list. You've made me want to go back and reread the group, so I will do that. You mentioned so many other things. I was jotting them down. Courtney, just always such a pleasure to speak with you. You always
too.
You pull on that thread that we realize it's like a frock we're wearing. Like, oh my gosh, that's my story. So thank you so much. I think we're going to go back to our host now. But Courtney, thank you.
Robin, thank you. Thank you so much. And also, I just want to say quickly, thank you so much to Dick Haley at Haley Booksellers and all of these magnificent libraries, which are always my favorite places to visit. And I'm sad that we're not seeing each other in person this time around, but I really appreciate all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you both, Courtney, and thank you, Robin. I mean, this has been such a fun and engaging conversation, and thank you for it. And thank you to Haley Booksellers and all of the wonderful libraries who co-sponsored this event. And thank you to everyone watching. You've been a great audience, and we couldn't do what we do without you. So good night. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Bye.